are joined now by Graham Couch, a columnist for the Lansing State Journal. Talk a little Michigan State football. Graham, how are you this morning?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, Graham, good to talk to you again. But it's been a little bit of a whirlwind. It's funny. We're doing our opponent previews, and I'm telling you, at least around here, Graham. I don't know if it's fact or fiction for you, and maybe I'm partly to blame. The Michigan State coming here on our schedule is a little bit. It's like it's become that game that we're like, oh man, is this our UCLA of last year? Like, are they better than we think? What's the questions with? And listen, we can't afford to look past anyone, but I'm just telling you that since we're talking to you, that Michigan State, I think, definitely has the state of Nebraska's attention. You think that's valid?
Well, I think it's smart, and especially in this Big Ten, where like for Michigan State's schedule, they don't have Ohio State or Oregon this year. They do have Penn State, but they've got a lot of opponents who are like their Vegas over under is 7.5, right? And it's just a lot of teams that is Nebraska going to take that step this year? What is Minnesota? Indiana, do they do it again? There's just a lot of that. And what is USC? And so some of how things go will be dictated by the opponent, and we don't know for sure about a lot of the opponents. And with Michigan State, I think there are what they have that they haven't had potentially is some strengths that can give opponents problems. Like they've had a lot of weaknesses the last couple of years, and a lot of areas where they lose the matchup. They have not had a lot of matchups they win, and it's hard to win football games when you need everybody to play really well because you don't naturally win a lot of matchups. I think what potentially gives them a shot in games against teams that maybe aren't quite the upper playoff tier but are the next tier down is their offense. If Aidan Chiles takes the step that a lot of people think he could, the offensive line people think will be better. Now that's people have been hoping for that for about 10 years now, so we'll see. But the receiving group, if those two things are better, the receivers have a chance to be a legitimate weapon and an area that really makes a difference, and where that's something that they're better than the opposing defensive backs. And that's a matchup problem for people. And that's important for a program that doesn't have the advantage everywhere. It won't have the advantage on the defensive line, I don't think, all the time. It's good at linebacker, but there's some questions in the secondary. Like there are questions, and there are flaws within the roster. And so they need places that separate them. And I think that group of receivers, a couple of which they brought in, Nick Marsh, the sophomore returning, I think has a chance to be very, very good in the sort of group that if you overlook can get you on a given day.
I get it. It's a quarterback-driven league, but I'm super familiar with Rossi. He recruited the heck out of my kiddo when he was at Minnesota, and he's got a really good track record. If I said, Graham, Michigan State's they're gonna do some things this year, but you have to base your opinion on track record of what we saw from a year ago that you think is going to be different than this year. Would you go with Rossi and that defense, or would you start at the quarterback spot and think that who makes the biggest stride, do you think is more indicative of how the season's going to play out?
I would go with the quarterback. Now, I think Rossi's a really good coordinator. I think he's a proven coordinator. And some of what happens this year will be a little more on him, right? Because a year ago, you kind of –
that was bad.
And you inherit a roster largely, and the guys you bring in, you're doing it through a fire hose in the transfer portal when you don't really understand what you need yet. And now you've had time. People are there, have chosen to be there. You've had time to go out and get guys. So the GM part of being a coordinator and figuring out what you need, that's now on him a little bit. And I do think they can't be as bad as last year where they went 6 games without a sack, and finished with 5 in Big Ten play. Like that, it was just a slow death.
The third downs too, right?
Yeah, just brutal. Just they couldn't get off the field, and they couldn't. But yeah, it was, and so I don't think it'll be that bad. I think they'll be good at linebacker. There are a couple, promising players on the defensive line, but they're a little unproven. And are they truly difference makers? I have my questions still. With Chiles, I think Chiles made a boatload of mistakes last year, and he also lost his confidence at a certain point and started reining it back in. But they could not protect him, and they couldn't run the football consistently. And there just aren't a lot of quarterbacks at the college level who would be successful. Like if you put Aidan Chiles on Penn State a year ago, even sophomore Aidan Chiles was still 18, like he's 19 now. He's third-year college football. He's 19 till September, which is incredible because most of these guys are like 26 now. But but if you just put him instead of Drew Aller on Penn State a year ago, I don't think they're worse at Penn State. You know what I mean? Like I think if you put a quarterback with his gifts with a good situation where he's protected, has a running game and weapons, he does really well. So the question is, do they have those things in place? Some of it he's got to grow, and he's a second-year starting quarterback now, but he's got all the tools in the world. And so if they do put those things around him and it doesn't work, then those are flaws that I don't know that he'll be able to overcome. And how well he reads defenses, how well he does pre-snap stuff and reacts and play. I think the key for him is not making huge mistakes when he has to play off schedule, but then also playing more on schedule. But they've got. I mean, he was running for his life a lot last year, and they just didn't have the weapons that they do right now on the outside. So I think there's a real chance that he looks really good, and people are surprised by it. But I think we often forget that just how much, especially with young quarterbacks at the college level, really any level, but how much their success is dictated by being protected and having a running game, just having some basic things around them.
Graham, let's take Chiles out of it for the purposes of this question. If Michigan State is able to have an improvement this year of a couple wins, get to a bowl game, maybe perform a little bit better than national media thinks they're going to, who are some of the guys we're going to be talking about that are the reason for that?
Well, I think, Nick Marsh is the sophomore receiver who's, an NFL talent. And I think Michigan State is grateful that you can't go to the NFL till after your third year because he's only a sophomore. Because he's a 6'3" guy with all the tools. And, I think now obviously he's going to have more attention on him, and it happened throughout the end of the last year, and he's got to be consistent and all that stuff. But they've really added Omari Kelly, a transfer from Middle Tennessee, and Krishawn McCray, and they've a real speedster out of Kent State. They've recognized. I think they're doing the portal pretty well. They've recognized where the receiver is a diva position, right? It's a position where guys, you can find them all over at every level. They get overlooked at a certain level, and it's a great portal position. It really is, and I think they've done a nice job. And there's a lot of buzz about those guys, and just so the guys they put around Marsh will make a huge difference. And then the big thing is, you got to go back to 2015, the playoff year, when they actually lost at Nebraska that year. And that was the last time they had a line that could push somebody around. And I don't know where they'll be in that, in terms of really a dominant line, but they have some guys they're high on, some guys who have been good enough in the off season that they had to really pay this spring from an NIL and rev share perspective. They brought in 4 new players up front that I think they're high on. I think that group, if it, and they've got a really good offensive line coach who's pretty proven in Jim Mahalchek. If that comes together at some point, that changes a lot. The program just hasn't had it in forever. Even the year they had Kenneth Walker, they were okay up front. They were, but he was just dynamic, and they had great receivers. And so I think Michigan State fans don't even know what that looks like anymore, like an offensive line that wins. It's just been so long since it's happened consistently. It would happen on a random week. Like last week they beat Iowa. Last year they beat Iowa because on a random week they looked really good up front, and Iowa schemed and, didn't bother them. But yeah, I think that's where it's going to be. And then defensively, they've just got to be. If they're not going to be great, I don't think. So they've got to be opportunistic.
Who leads the way? Is that Snow probably?
Jordan Hall is the linebacker that you hear the most about. Jalen Thompson on the defensive line on the edge, a big guy who can play inside and out. But Snow is the guy who will be out there. But I think Jordan Hall is the linebacker you're hearing the most about. Is probably the green dot, the guy that wears the helmet that interacts with the coaches and puts people in place. And I think he thought that was going to be his year last year as a sophomore. He was good as a true freshman, but they brought in a transfer from Wisconsin who kind of filled that role, and so it's his time. And you're seeing some of the guys, when you look around Mel Tucker, not everything worked in that era, obviously, but he did recruit pretty well in a couple classes, and you're seeing a couple of those classes bear some fruit. The guys who stuck around, and Jordan Hall and Jalen Thompson are two guys who are third-year players who were part of one of Tucker's part of Tucker's last class.
Opponent preview with Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal, talking all things Michigan State. Graham, I think the prevailing, and it was a weird time of the hire, so I think it kind of flew under the radar nationally, but there are a lot of folks that feel like, especially given the time, Jonathan Smith was an amazing hire in terms of what Sparty pulled off. Is that kind of the consensus there with a fan base that is accustomed to having some success with that program? Is there the reverence, maybe too strong of a word, but was there the appreciation of the hire of Jonathan Smith, do you think?
Not at all. And so I think at the first point there was some, like, there are people who are there are some who like it. There was not consensus. Like, there were donors, the Matt Ishbias of the world, who wanted them to go hard after Urban Meyer. And he's like, the biggest donor in the world. They've since fired the AD last spring. Yeah. So that was the guy who hired Jonathan Smith. And then, I think Smith's a really good coach, but there are a lot of people that think, if he has a bad year this year, that he should be gone. Now, that's ridiculous because there are a few reasons for that. One, they would owe him $33 million. And if you have $33 million to spend, which Michigan State does not, but if you had $33 million to spend, you should put it, if you've got a good coach, into your roster.
Right.
And so that would be my advice. The other thing is, where Jonathan Smith didn't, what they really wanted after the last year of Mel Tucker and him being fired, and then Harlan Barnett was there, and they were just getting slaughtered at the end, is they really wanted competence throughout. They wanted a year that felt like, and they didn't get that last year. The last 5 games were really, now they were beat up and they were young certain places. They had lots of holes, but when you lose at home 41-14 to Rutgers in the season finale, like, that, people don't leave with a good sense of where things are going. And then the game that hurt them the most last year was the Michigan game, which dictates so much of the mood around here. And it was probably Smith's worst coach game. They had a lead. They had some control of the game and really let it get away. And then there was a skirmish at the end that they kind of complained about. And then when the Big Ten didn't step up and do anything, sort of meekly, waddle away with their tails between their legs. And so, and he didn't, the thing that made D'Antonio beloved before he won big at Michigan State was he flipped the script on that Michigan rivalry. And even before he did that, he met fans where they were. So in 2007, famously, there's the little brother comment from Mike Hart, the running back at Michigan, after they beat him, right? And it's how D'Antonio met that. It was this, how every MSU fan was feeling in that moment. He met them there. You could see it in him. And it was this, it'll never be over. Pride comes before the fall, all the stuff. And then the next year they went to Ann Arbor and beat him. And, that what Jonathan Smith needs more than anything, you got a Michigan program that people around here think cheated. You've got a Michigan program that's won a ton in the last few years, including a national championship 2 years ago. They need to beat Michigan. If he beats Michigan and they get to 6 wins, people will be good. If he meets that moment in that rivalry, and he didn't, both in language and the performance on the field, didn't seem to do it last year. I think it stunned him what that rivalry is. People, I think coming from Oregon State, and the dynamic of Oregon State to Oregon, I think he maybe felt like he had experienced it, and it's different. It's there's a venom that's 365 here, especially on the Michigan State side, that you have to live to really understand how to react to. And because you hear it if you're a coach, from fans and your donors and your AD constantly. I mean, it is, and I don't think he met that moment last year, and so he's win or lose, he's got to handle that better, and how he treats that game.
That's Graham Couch, columnist for the Lansing State Journal, giving us a little Michigan State preview. Graham, we appreciate the time and the expertise. We will catch up with you soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Graham.
Look forward to it.
You got it.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
It's Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal. Good stuff there on Michigan State.